to me, that was like my whole life up to that point. It's just everything was about Pe'ahi, it was about Jaws, it was about following the footsteps of these incredible big wave riders. And
you have to be so overly ready that you just leave as little up to chance as possible.
He did 3 full flips holding on to the jet ski before they got exploded.
And I saw this thing coming in. I'm like, watch, this is going to be the biggest, best Jaws wave you've ever seen.
The guys back in the day were absolute savages. It's a wonder no one died back then.
I had to live a little off. Yeah, I had to cut a bill off. Yeah, but if we be real though.
All right, part 2 of our mini Jaws series. I don't know how many parts are going to come because we have a lot of stories, but I guess we'll keep going until we run out. But I think at the end of the last one we did, it was sort of, we were getting to the start of my career out there, but you were teasing a couple stories from the really, really early days, like pre-strapped films and all that. So maybe tell us a couple stories about that. Sounded sick.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was thinking about this. The guys back in the day were absolute savages because before tow windsurfing, windsurfing was the only way you could go fast enough to ride these giant waves. You had the power of the sail on a windsurf board. You could actually match power with power. And Maui being a windy place, and Pe'ahi, Jaws, is one of those spots where the wind is perfect direction for windsurfing. Guys had attempted to surf, I think, Jaws when it was smaller back in the day, but no one had really properly touched this place once it was 50 to 60 feet. It was just not doable. It was impossible. And with windsurfing, you could actually do it. So I just remember hearing these stories of Brett Lickle, Dave Kalama, and Josh Angulo sailing up there one afternoon when the waves were absolutely giant. You know, back then you didn't have Surfline. You didn't have the technology we have to predict swells. So you really had to be at the right place at the right time, post up. And these guys were, you know, winning professional windsurfing events at Ho'okipa. And so it got so big, they knew of this wave because Jerry Lopez had mentioned it. Jerry had been looking at this wave since probably the late 60s. And they decided to sail the 5 miles upwind. And the wind shifts around the lighthouse, which is just before Pe'ahi. And again, it's a really long sail. And it's sharky, it's deep blue water. And in the afternoon, it might have taken them an hour and a half to sail upwind. By the time they got there, they were basically riding the biggest waves anyone had ever ridden up to that point, immediately. I mean, giant waves have been paddle surfed before, but tow surfing had yet to exist. These were like unrecorded sessions for the most part. I think occasionally someone might be on the cliff or someone from Ho'okipa would navigate the pineapple fields back when they were pineapple fields all the way to the cliff and capture a photo or two. And on this particular session, these guys were riding these giant waves, no vests, no rescue, maybe one person on the cliff from Ho'okipa. And, you know, one particular ride that stood out to everyone was Josh Angulo accidentally getting barreled on a windsurfer. And there's only, I think, one photo in existence, and it's him like just coming out in the pocket. But by their accounts, by everyone's account, he like pulled up too deep, wind being really light at the bottom. The wind comes from a very easterly direction, so it's really offshore. So once you're in the wave, you're really riding on what's called a parent wind, which is the wind created by the speed that which you're moving forward. And if you go too far to the flats, you'll lose all sail pressure. And I think he went pretty much to the flats. And it stalled him to the perfect spot where this wave just lurched over him. And he was in a barrel that was big enough to fit, maybe at the time, a 12-foot tall sail. The sails have gotten much shorter now. They're about 9 feet. So no excuses for not getting barreled out there. But you need the perfect wave. And honestly, if it's too windy, you know, there's so much moving. There's so much airflow change on that wave where it's really no wind at the bottom, but a lot of swirling in the barrel because the barrel is sucking air in. And then at the top of the wave, it's like 3 or 4 times the wind speed because of the 25 mile an hour wave moving forward. And then, you know, the lip throwing down at another 15 or 20 miles an hour. So there's just a lot of going on. So when you're navigating with a windsurfer, you're just hyper aware of everything and where you're going to set yourself up. In this case, it was so light, he just ended up being in the pocket and literally getting barreled. And you got to think there's nowhere else to come in. It's all rocky cliff. So after that monumental session, I think it was probably like 1990 or maybe the late 80s, they drifted all the way back down to Hokipa in the dark, navigating 30 to 40 foot waves at Hokipa itself and getting washed up the beach. And, you know, it's a wonder no one died back then. It's just a bunch of savages. I guess you just didn't know any better. I don't know if they didn't know any better, or it's just you kind of just went with it, and it was just this evolution thing. And you know, that was like one of the cooler sessions I've ever heard, because it was back when it wasn't ever even photographed really, or it was just a taboo place. It was just this wave that, you know, you wouldn't go out there to win awards. You would just go out there because you felt like sending it that hard.
It's so gnarly, and I cannot believe they went up there with like no backup, like not even a boat, and they were just a lot of times in board shorts or maybe a rash guard. And when you fall on the windsurfer, the thing just goes straight into the rocks instantly, and what are you gonna do then? You're kind of
you fall once on a windsurfer, everything is shredded at that wave. It's so powerful. Your board would be fine, but your sail and your rig, it's gone, and it's on the rocks. And in their case, they'd probably try to swim in, but that would take hours. I think when guys did break stuff, if I'm not mistaken, they would just hold on to their friend's other foot strap, and the person would just sail downwind and troll them all the way down to either, you know, a nearby bay that they could swim in and then hike out, or, you know, very rarely, I think they would go all the way to Okipa. I think they would drop them somewhere they could navigate up. And, you know, one way they would used to sail up there was like, there's this famous clip in the film Rip, which is Robbie Nash's premiere movie that everyone watched back in the day. It was him and his sail designer and, you know, Charger, Don Montague, and they launched at the lighthouse, and it was the closest point that they could go to sail upwind. So they probably saved 45 minutes, but it was super risky, and they'd go onto this edge of this cliff or these rocks and jump off. And if you didn't make it, you get swept into the lagoon, basically like a big open pool. And Don mistimed it, and he got absolutely swept off. And the clip is crazy. It's it's in that Rip video. Ridge, you should pull it up.
I'll try to find it.
It's on YouTube. You could find it.
Sick.
But then sail up in no wind, and Robbie was riding the biggest waves ever windsurfed up to that point. I remember that story. I remember another one where when they first started towing surfing, and you know, you're on these little hamster jet skis. One time a friend was sitting on the back. They had just finished towing, and they fell off, and they ended up having to swim 3 miles down the coast because their buddy was just looking forward and not paying attention. And I always remember that, because when I'm even just driving home, even though you're not surfing the wave, it's not over until you're at home. And a Navy SEAL told me that once when I was on a trip with them. We were in Patagonia climbing these mountains, but that's another story. But the point is your mission's never done until you're literally at home. And so he was just like probably on an absolute high of surfing these gigantic waves, looking at the sunset, looking at Maui. And this, you know, back then the machines were very loud, and his buddy just rolled off the back and had to swim in. And there was like Coast Guard looking, you know, his wife was freaking out, and he eventually just climbed up a cliff and then got picked up by someone else eventually. And so there's like those little nuanced stories. I mean, Ridge, remember we were doing a beach cleanup once all along the coastline to Peahi? It was, and we found a jet ski engine that was like 4 miles away in a bay, and it was obviously from Jaws, and it just had like gotten destroyed on the rocks. This machine destroyed, because some jet skis back in the day they would go on the rocks, no one could get to them that day, and then the next day they would be gone because the tide would come up and the waves would be bigger. And we found a literal engine like 4 miles away in like this other cove, and you're just like, whoa, how did it go all the way over here in the current, on the ground, on the bottom? Must have taken it 10 years to get to that point.
I know. Remember that one time, it was just thinking of like things going wrong on the way to or from the wave. It was one of the big, I think it was, what do they call that day? Super Swell Saturday or something a couple years ago. And we were on our way up, and like we come upon these guys and their jet skis sinking. And they're like halfway like in the water, and it's like, it's the biggest swell in years. Like they're outside of 40 foot closing out outer reefs, and they're like
dusted out, brought it out of the bushes. That jet ski was like so old.
And we like pull up and we're like, are you guys okay? And they're like, yeah, we're fine. Like, just go ahead. And we're like, we are not leaving you out here. But I think
the thing is luckily all of these, whether it's a jet ski, a Sea-Doo, a wave runner, the hulls all have foam in them. So they will float, but
kind of.
Yeah, they'll float just the nose. It'll never fully sink. It'll fill with water, but it'll never fully sink. And these guys are borderline there because this, the machine might have been neglected all summer or even years. And then they were like, hey, my buddy's got a jet ski in the backyard. Let's go grab it. And what ends up happening is you have plugs in the very back. And so if you don't put the plugs in, it can fill up with water. Usually it's there so when you get out of the water, you can drain any water that gets in because water still gets in through the drive shaft and everything. So you kind of want those plugs. Even if it fills up in the water, you can open them and drive and then have it drain out and then really quickly close them. But I think what happened with theirs, the drive shaft seal probably had broken over just being constant neglect, not used, not replaced. And so the whole thing filled up. And eventually we called the lifeguards and they came, but that put a tiny bit delay on our mission. And it's just so hard to like pass people that are like probably in more danger than they realize. Because at the end of the day, you don't want to hear on the news like something happened to someone, they never made it home. But, it's their responsibility at the same time to be aware because they clearly weren't meant to be out there that day.
No, it was massive.
Or most days. I mean, most often people get themselves way over their head. And I just don't understand it. I'm like, it's pretty obvious. I mean, we just were raised, I think, quite differently, right? But
yeah,
it's like pretty obvious. You should probably not be doing that.
Yeah. No, you see that stuff a lot in big waves. It's funny. I could never... Like, I always felt like approaching the sport, like you have to be so overly ready that you just leave as little up to chance as possible. Like it'd be hard to imagine not keeping right upkeep of your ski, not doing the proper training. And just, there's a lot of, it's scary enough when you're super trained and you know how to surf waves like that. It's still gnarly. So I can't imagine not having those things and wanting to go out there still.
Well, going back to the OG days, I remember I went up and snowboarded with Jerry up in Bend, Oregon, and it was pretty sick. So Jerry Lopez, of course, is the Mr. Pipeline. He, had his house right there at Pipeline. But when he left the North Shore, he moved actually to Maui. And he spent a lot of time here, either windsurfing, surfing, shaping boards. Pretty much, he spent a good chunk of time here on Maui, which is pretty legendary. And then eventually he moved to Bend, Oregon, to continue snowboarding, for example. And but I remember being up there, and then over dinner he told me this crazy story of one day, because they didn't have forecasting, you would just be at the beach and waves would get too big, and at a certain point they wouldn't go surfing anywhere, and they would end up just like, hey, let's go check out domes, let's go check out Jaws, because there used to be a dome house up at Pe'ahi back in the day, and it was like, it was basically where you would turn to go to the spot. Oh, just go past the domed house. So the name of the spot was like domes, and I think after this day, they also coined the name Dragon's Breath because every time it spat, it looked like a dragon spitting fire. Jeez. I always thought that was a sick name for it too. And then, kind of going through the name list, Pe'ahi is actually the area of Jaws or of domes of Dragon's Breath. It's the area, and that area obviously goes into the ocean. So the Hawaiian word is like Pe'ahi to be called the beacon. Jaws came from National Geographic cover with Laird Hamilton on it. But anyway, they go down there, and he told me on this particular day, up to this point in time, and I would still argue to this day because this was a couple of years ago, he had never seen the spot bigger, and he said anyone that has ever surfed out there on the biggest days, it didn't come close to as big as it was now. Jeez. Because where the boats typically sit was the barrel of the wave, and it was connecting with the other point that was just down the way. Now, the right usually fades off, and it's a pretty big, deep channel. The channel itself's 100 feet deep, but the wave was so massive, and there was so much mass to it. It was basically avalanching across this 100-foot channel and connecting to this next little point. So totally makeable. I think if you shoulder soldiered it, as the way he put it. And then the left was going past the point into the next bay. So there's like another bay, and normally it ends right at this rock point. But he said it was so much bigger that and it was pretty much unrideable because every time it would break in a perfect barrel left and right, but it would spit so hard because of all the compressed air inside of these giant tubes. It would eat itself. So it would spit, dragon's breath, all this water would shoot out like cannons, and kind of the hydraulic of water out the back would be sending cannons 200 feet in the air. And the wave would just eat itself. It would just collapse. And he's like, you probably would die if you went out there. Well, especially back then. So they watched it. He said that no one's ever surfed it near it. And if he'd argue the waves were at least 100 feet or bigger, maybe 115 feet. It was just top to bottom barreling. And I've always dreamt of this day, of longing for it. And I'm wondering, I was trying to figure out what day that could have been, because there's freak swells that happen all the time that, aren't even really recorded. Some of the biggest waves ever ridden here on Maui, it was forecasted to be 4 to 6 feet, and ended up being, the legendary 100-foot day that Laird and Lickle surfed, which we should talk about after this. But I'm wondering if it was I think he said it was sometime in the 70s or something, early 70s, 69. I was about to say,
in my house, I think it might have been 72, but I have a picture that's hanging of Outer Sprecks. And you know which one I'm talking about, that crazy A-frame. It's like nuking Kona winds that day. Yeah. And like it's shot from Baldwin Beach Park, and it's obviously like a freaking 80-foot wave. And
yeah, that was huge.
Yeah. Tom Severson, the guy that started John Severson, that's right. Took it, and very well could have been the same day. That's crazy.
Well, you should take a photo of that picture on the wall, or find it online, because the wave is so big. And just for context, this wave is probably raking 3/4 or even close to 1 mile out to sea. And it's the closest thing to a Nazare A-frame. It's the original massive A-frame. And yeah, that wave is, when that spot gets really big, we call it Outer Sprecks or Spartan Reef, that whole area, because there was a ship, an old time ship that had sunk there called the Spartan back in the way old school days, like 200 years ago. And now it's just a wood frame underwater. But that wave itself, once it gets too big, it goes farther out, and they call it pyramids or Egypts, because, the wave turns into a giant A-frame, huge pyramid. But that wave, for sure, if it looked that big from the shoreline, and yeah, it had a telephoto lens, but even still, that wave was like a mile out to sea and 80 feet.
Yeah, it could have easily been bigger too. You just don't know, and we know that wave, I think, has the potential to be bigger than Jaws. It's definitely not
the biggest wave in the world. I think it could get bigger than Nazare, to be honest, because I think where Nazare gets kind of tight and it moves on to the Big Mama section, and it might not get as top to bottom. I think Nazare has a limit of like maybe 80 feet on the inside, 70 feet on the inside, and then once it moves it out, it gets taller, like 100 feet, but it's not top to bottom anymore. It becomes more of like an avalanche. And I guess there's truth to the physics of it. I mean, at a certain point, you need enough water underneath it to support it to, all
it's just
that
too
mass
heavy for it to be,
top to bottom. But I think the difference is there is a little bit of a trench out there, and we're so exposed in the middle of the ocean, and with the right swell direction. I mean, if you were to ask Laird, and you could probably find his account of this, I'll just share, my account from the day, because I somehow was there, but as a 13-year-old kid on the beach. He claims it was the biggest waves that he had ever seen, and that there were 100-foot waves coming in on this left, and they weren't even tapping into that. They were instead riding the 80 to 90-foot waves over here, and I'd say it was probably bigger, because I feel like over Laird's career, he's never called it, as big as it might actually be.
Yeah. I remember that was 2007, just a giant swell. And
was it 7 or 6?
2007. And I remember because I got picked up from school by our family friend Barkley, and he took me and his daughter down to Hokipa to check it out. And to this day, I've never seen it even close. Like,
really?
Just looking back, I think it was.
Did you guys go to Maliko first?
We went to Hokipa first. Like, we went down the old Maui High Road and popped out. And the first thing I see is this like A-frame wave in the middle of the channel between the point and lanes. And it was just like a barreling, like looked like a Jaws wave, but I've never seen a wave break that far out.
It's never been that big since, right?
Yeah. And then we were like, oh man, like Jaws must be going, Laird guys must be up there. because this was such a freak swell, I didn't even know what direction it was. It turned out it was directly north swell and wasn't good for Jaws. But we went to went to Maliko to see if there was jet skis, like trailers there, and then we could see if they were out. And we pull up there and there's no one there. And the whole bay was sucking dry to the mouth of the bay, like dry. It was like mud. And then it would come in like a tsunami every 5 minutes and flood all the way to the road, basically, where the bridge is. Like, that's, in my lifetime, that has never even come close to being like that. And didn't you and Dad almost tried going out that day at the harbor, right?
Well, I just remember, we went and checked the beach, and it was so big that there was fog because all the salt spray in the air, you couldn't barely see the outer reef being 3/4 to a mile out. And I can remember we went to Baby Beach, which is just kind of near where we live, and we were looking out, and I could see out of the fog whitewater going across 50 to 60 foot deep of water, the channel between, basically the outer reef where it's shallow all the way to shoreline. It gets pretty deep. And I could remember just seeing little whitewater trails coming all the way in, like almost to shore, which is
that's so
a
ominous.
mile of whitewater and 50 to 60 foot deep water. It just was so big. There's so much energy in the water. And I think that type of swell is pretty much impossible to forecast because, again, the long range, it was looking at 4 to 6 feet, and it was a close proximity storm. I want to say only 500 or 600 miles off the coast of Maui, and it just so happened to be the right direction, and it didn't accompany wind, which is super rare when a storm's like that close. There wasn't an onshore that came with it. I think, if you ask anyone, it was the biggest day anyone had ever seen here on Maui and maybe in the entire world up to that point for sure. But I could just remember where the beach normally is. There's ironwood trees that are probably 20 feet up the beach, up on a giant sand dune. The waves were going through the ironwood trees. The normal parking lot had full of water, but you couldn't see the outer reef. And I was 13 years old, and my dad's like, "Oh, let's go down to the harbor and let's go check it out." Our dad, I keep saying my dad, but our dad took me, to let's go, because we used to tow kind of by the harbor over there, and this was a normal thing. And I could remember driving down, and back when you really only listened to the radio because iPods and Spotify didn't exist, we're driving, and then all of a sudden you just hear oh, it's 4 to 6 feet at Kanaha. And we come around the corner, and then the harbor mouth is closing out 40-foot waves, completely closing out the harbor. Where the normal channel is from the boat ramp is just full of whitewater, 10 to 12-foot slabbing waves just hitting. It's just the biggest I'd ever seen in there. There was actually, I ended up eventually surfing the left, which was Harbor Lights. It's just this perfect left, it's like a poor version of restaurants in Fiji, Tavarua.
Must have been big.
Oh, it was
slabbing.
Massive. I was pretty young and I wasn't surfing to its full potential, but if I were to call it a certain size, it was 8-foot Hawaiian on the sets and draining, and guys were getting tubed all the way across. And this is the corner of inside a harbor where the harbor mouth itself is 40 yards across. It's not very big. It's a small entrance, maybe even 50 yards. But anyway, the DLNR guy was down there, and he's like, "Yeah, it's probably not the day to take your son out there." And sure enough, later on, you just heard the lore, the stories of what people went through. I think the swell was too northerly for Jaws, and so it wasn't really even breaking properly. Guys went up there, but it wasn't big. When it gets too north up there, the wave just almost shuts down. I'm not closing out. It just
it doesn't get the refraction the same way.
It doesn't peak up. So
yeah.
But Outer Sprecks, Spartans, Pyramids was 100 feet. And so later on, we heard the story, the lore of, I think Dave Kalama wasn't on island. That's Laird's tow partner at the time. Derek Dorner was on Oahu, where he lives in Haleiwa. And this swell wasn't meant to be anything. It was just wow, we saw it. Let's go out. And as Laird described it, they were out there, and there was these 90-foot waves breaking from Paia all the way down to the airport. One single peeling right, and that's what happens when it gets really big because the wave moves so far out. And he was dropping into these waves, and even Laird, the fastest big wave surfer ever, because he has all that weight and momentum. And I think at the time he had 30-pound balsa wood Dick Brewer 6'6" towing boards with a stance of, if my stance is 24 inches in between the straps, his has to be like 40, maybe even wider, just full Laird stance. And he couldn't outrun the wave. He would get going down the line on this perfectly peeling Ma'alaya style wave, and he couldn't keep up with it. And he'd end up having to punch out the back. And back then, the skis were probably around 1200 cc. So I'm guessing like 160 horsepower or something, 180, which seems like a lot if you're on, a quad or something or a motorcycle. But in water, there's so much drag on the hulls that it's slow. And nowadays, for comparison, we have skis that are 225 cc, and after modifications probably get closer to like 230 horsepower. So a big difference. And, I think he had some rides unsuccessfully, caught some small ones, and they couldn't even touch this left that was breaking across that he claimed was just 100 feet tall. Jeez. Waves moving slow motion. I think he said it took like 3 or 4 seconds for the lip to hit the water once it started peeling over. So can you imagine that? Like 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,004.
I remember one of the few times we were hanging out with Laird in like a normal setting. I remember you asked him how big it was that day, and he didn't give you a foot, like he didn't put it in feet. He said, well, when I've jumped off 100-foot cliffs, it takes me about 4 or 5 seconds to hit the water, and that's how long it took for the lip to land.
I love
whoa.
When Laird, when you watch interviews of Laird too, like, how long can you hold your breath? Long enough, which is like the most crazy answer, because who cares how long you can hold it? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 4? Whatever. It's like long enough to survive. And I remember that day too, because he was like, you see that pine tree right there? Because ironically, there are pine trees on the beach here in Hawaii. If you didn't realize that, it's just they somehow exist like that. But he looked up and he's like, add 20 feet to that. And it was just like a 80-foot pine tree. You're like 20 feet on top of that. 16 years old or whatever. Yeah. But like years later when we had him reenact, he must have gotten sick of it, because I think every time we saw him, we were like, well, how big was it?
Yeah, because there's no videos, there's no evidence of that day, really. I think there's a couple photos of Pier 1 and other big wave spot, but other than that, that day was pretty much undocumented, which is kind of a bummer.
The problem with that day is they normally had Don Shear of Windward Aviation, who's also the fire department. I think he couldn't fly because it was too foggy. He literally couldn't fly because of the salt spray. So you imagine the eeriness. It probably looked like Mavericks out there. But I guess to get to the gnarliest part of that Laird and Brett Lickle story. So Dave's not there. Brett Lickle, if you ask Brett, he's like, look, I was never meant to do this. I just found myself at the right place at the right time, or depending on how you feel in the moment, the wrong place at the right time. Because now Laird's like, this is the day he'd been waiting for in his entire career, to ride the biggest waves ever ridden. And sure enough, the day came and the only person that was available to go towing was Brett. And so Brett was like, okay, I'll just drive you, which is, I think, probably music to Laird's ears, because he could just like focus solely on surfing. So to get back to it, he was riding these waves, couldn't make them, kept having to kick out. Eventually he just committed to one. And, it sounded like it was like an 80-foot wave. He was going like 60 miles an hour. And then he couldn't make it, so he punched through the back of this huge barrel, like it was peeling across, just like Ma'alaya. Imagine Ma'alaya, but like 90 feet, right?
Yeah.
And then from basically Brett came in to save him, and they did the most perfect pickup, just grabbed him, threw him on the sled full throttle. But these waves were moving faster than anywhere else. And I'd argue that Outer Sprecks, the wave itself moves faster because it's in deeper water, and it doesn't hit a ledge like it does at Jaws, where it slows down all of a sudden. And so they were outrunning it, and then all of a sudden this wave just started catching up to him. It was like they were standing still. And I had that moment at Nazare, talked about it in the Nazare episode, where even on a machine that's 200 horsepower, I could barely outrun one of these bigger waves. It just moves at a speed that's unlike anything else. And so they were doing that, and eventually the wave caught up to him, and Brett described it as getting picked up from the tail, and basically he did 3 full flips holding on to the jet ski before they got exploded. But before that, I guess from what initially the first story we heard was like the wave exploded so hard behind them that the spray itself hit him in the back of the calf and split his calf open and his whole muscle came out. Another account was like maybe it was actually Laird's board that they had left, shot out of the whitewater with his aluminum fins and hit him in the calf, and his entire calf muscle was hanging out. It was like a deconstructed burrito. It was just basically like where his bone was like showing, and this thing was flapping there. He honestly probably just felt like a little sting, because when you get that bad of an injury, a bad of a cut, it doesn't you can't feel any more pain than a certain level. It just sort of feels like a stinging, like I don't know. It feels like getting sprayed by water, really, like really high pressured water, like stings really bad. Yeah. That's probably what it felt like. And so they did 3 full flips, obviously lost the machine. I think they both had, was it like 2 or 3 wave hold down as well? Because they just had the normal life vests, and somehow they both surfaced. Brett knew something was wrong because all of a sudden there was a pool of blood around him. And, if in that amount of whitewater, if there's blood around you, you're losing everything. And at this point, I think Laird had a decision to make because they popped up somehow near each other. He ended up peeling off his entire wetsuit, tourniqueting Brett in the leg, and being like, literally saying, "I'll come back for you." Just imagine Laird saying, "I'll come back for you."
That's crazy.
And then just swimming away. And he was, bare naked, swam, because he knew Brett's going to die unless I can get on the jet ski and by some miracle it starts and I can come back and get him. But if I just have to swim him in, he's going to lose too much blood before we can make it to shore, because literally even if you're on the inside of pyramids, that's still a mile to go. And that's going to take 40 minutes probably to swim in, especially if you're going against the current, depending on where you fall. And Brett was actually stuck in the current because right at that wave, the current goes 2 different directions. He was getting sucked up to Ho'okipa, and Laird had to swim down to the airport. And somehow, I think the ski was probably like a half a mile away from him at that point, just got swept away. Got there. What he forgot to grab off of Brett was the lanyard that starts the machine. And so then somehow none of the seats were ripped off. None of the thing, the thing is, when you get in really, really big waves, it's really terrifying. There's a lot more water and you can drown obviously really easily, but it gets so aerated that sometimes the wipeout itself isn't as bad. And I'm wondering if that jet ski didn't get torn apart because there was so much air that was infused in that white water.
There's so much water moving too, and giant masses versus small masses that would rip it apart. Right?
Yeah, the smaller masses might tear at something, but when you're in a big undulation underwater, you're going with it. That's why I feel like you get more tweaked out at Jaws when it's 12 to 15 feet versus 25 feet, because you fit into the cogs of that vortex a little bit better when it's bigger. So anyway, he ends up having, back then, I think it was, he had some sort of cable or cord. It might have actually been an iPod or like something that they had kept in there to get pumped up, listen to music. And he wrapped it around there's this little button that toggles up, it pulls up, and that's what allows the machine to start. And at this point, jet skis are completely finicky. They hardly ever work. They're just it's they already don't work as is because they're 2-stroked machines. And sure enough, it turned back on, which was, I think, a godsend. He went back, found Brett, coming full throttle in. I think he had a radio by chance in the jet ski as well. And he called the fire department or someone, and the ambulance was on its way. He beaches a ski all the way up the beach, past the lifeguard tower. He probably traveled a football field over sand with Brett on the back.
And he was naked.
Can you imagine just Laird in his godliness picking up Brett and just walking buck naked and giving him over to the ambulance? And, Brett almost died. He almost lost his leg. He lost a lot of blood. I mean, as close as you can get to dying without actually dying. And testament to how gnarly Brett actually is too, because maybe most wouldn't have survived. And then after Laird made sure that Brett was totally good and he was safe in the hospital, Laird called up his other buddy and he's like, "We're going back out." And he ended up riding he was so fired up because, his friend almost died and this was a once in a lifetime swell. You have to ride it. And from the accounts from, it was actually one of Brett Lickle's best friends took him out. The sun had sort of come out a little bit, and it was, by all accounts, Laird's greatest session because apparently he was surfing with a different type of, you know, he's already gnarly, but he was even gnarlier then because he had something to like prove, and he had to go toe to toe with, you know, the biggest waves. He had to prove to, I don't know, no one else was watching but God. He had to prove to God that he was put on this earth for the right reason, and he ended up just riding these 90-footers. And I don't think Laird, even if he rode a 100-footer, would ever claim he rode a 100-foot wave because it's like blasphemy for big wave surfing, you know? Because like,
yeah,
it's this, you know, when are you going to ride a 100-foot wave sort of thing. But anyway, apparently he just tore the place apart and successfully rode it and was going, instead of losing speed at 60, he was going 70 or something like that. But they were still commenting how there were 100-foot waves breaking just across the channel, and they weren't quite ready for it yet. And you know,
that same swell was a historic Mavericks day too. Mavericks was as big as they've ever seen it, and then I think that was the first time they had surfed Ghost Tree, really, really big.
Oh,
and that makes me think of
big.
Yeah, so that makes me think of like the one time I've surfed. I think Pyramids was just starting to go. You were on a trip to Mavericks, and that was the biggest day you've ever seen out there. Close to it, maybe when it was breaking out at the Green Buoy.
Yep.
And a friend and I, we were planning on going out to Outer Sprecks just to like mess around, like expecting it to be 8 feet. And we show up to the beach and it's like, it looks like it's like 20 feet. So we go out there and it was probably one of the most fun sessions ever because there was no one out. And it was, I don't know how big it was. There's no footage or anything, but it felt like it was 20 with the occasional 25-foot plus wave. But it was just like, it was like lower trestles, but massive. Like you just do the biggest.
Can you
turns,
imagine
like,
though? It was, when Laird and those guys were out, it was like 3 times bigger.
I can't even imagine because it's a nuts wave because there is no channel. It's similar to Nazare and that. I mean, there is a defined peak, but that peak can shift hundreds of yards, and sometimes you kick out in the channel, think you're fine, and then there's a 15-footer closing out right in front of you. So I cannot imagine what they went through that day. If it was that much bigger.
It was literally like 40-foot Hawaiian. But I just think too, like, that particular swell was the biggest up to that point Mavericks had been surfed, and that storm was directly aimed at Hawaii. So that was just like the residuals that were coming off going to California. But I also want to think if Mavericks was that big, just imagine how big Cortez Bank was that day. Cortez must have been like, I mean, if the biggest wave in the world exists, maybe it's there. I don't know. Anywhere could be the biggest waves in the world. It just comes down to the storm, right? Like, yeah. It could be the biggest ever ridden here in Hawaii. It could be the biggest ever in Nazare. Frick, it could be the biggest in California. It all just depends on the storm. At the end of the day, if you have the right bottom contour and the right storm, it's going to get, you know, gigantic.
Yeah. What was the biggest Jaws day you've ridden out there?
The biggest Jaws day I'd ridden, I don't know. I mean, there was that January 21st day. That was probably one of the bigger days. Remember when young Adam from Poland took off on the biggest wave of the day, windsurfing, and didn't know what to do and just fell over at the bottom, and you know, someone else had like missed the wave before on their towboard and thought they could paddle over it, and they got sucked up backwards over the falls. And I could remember, so the situation was you were towing me in, and I could have gone on that wave and probably gotten the single best wave of my entire life.
It was the best Jaws wave I've ever seen in my life, for sure.
Right. I could have caught that, but it was Ian Walsh's turn, and they were just down the line a little bit getting towed in, and I thought for sure he was going. And I was like, oh, you know, looking back on it, frick, I maybe should have gone, but I just didn't want the drama of like a legend like Ian, and then you like snake his wave, and then you get these awards, and like it's just not good. Like it would ruin your relationship, not worth it. But I remember we were crossing in front of Adam, and Adam had sailed out, you know, and like he's never had any big wave experience, from Poland, great windsurfer though, and he just turned around and went. Like I mean, it was utter chaos that day. It was like a complete junk show, and I hope I never experienced that out there again, because it was just like the hype was around it. It was probably like how Laird felt and the Strap crew in 2004 with that, you know, day that they thought it was a bunch of bees swarming around. It was exactly that. But he dropped in, and I don't know if you could remember this, because Ian didn't end up going because he saw just this kamikaze coming down behind him on a windsurfer. And I could remember when the wave broke, I was like, there's no way he made it from where he was. You know, there's just no way, because he went straight. He didn't go down the line angle, like cutting down. I would be like, he could probably made it. But he kind of went straight down, then started turning. But from the back, there was so much extra water from this wave that imagine, you know, you could remember this, Rich. It was like the boats are here and, you know, the channel is over here. So there's the left and the right. And there's like a literal like water like this over the reef. You could see the reef, but not like because it's down, but because it's like so much water's on top. It's like sitting on top of like
it hadn't dispersed yet.
It hadn't dispersed yet. It was like on top of like a I don't know, a platform. It was just like, it was elevated. Like where the whitewater was higher than where the boats were. It was the weirdest thing. And somehow he had like completely fine after that. He should have totally died.
It's such like a matter of, it's such a matter of luck too on waves like that. But I remember I was sitting in the channel because I think at that point Ola was towing you.
Oh, Ola was towing me that time?
Yeah, because earlier in that day, I was still pretty new to towing out there, and I didn't feel comfortable enough, I guess, being as aggressive as you needed to be. I think now I'd be fine, but I was just intimidated by how freaking psycho it was with the crowd. But I remember sitting with Mom on a different jet ski in the channel, and I saw this thing coming in. I'm like, Mom, watch, this is going to be the biggest, best Jaws wave you've ever seen. I could just see the way it was coming in. It was like walling across the channel, coming out of the west. Like, this is the wave. Like, someone's going to get the greatest wave ever ridden right now. And it was like, you know, the best wave ever.
The wave.
It slabbed off the North Peak and just rifled all the way across. Like, you could have gotten a 12-second barrel on this thing. And then I just saw, like, I mean, Adam's a super nice kid, but I just saw him dropping and I'm like, oh no,
He's
like
done.
that was not the equipment to have on that wave. Like, you needed to be like, it was a career wave. Like, if you were on it, if Ian was on it, you would have to use every single ounce of your ability to ride this wave. It was just
probably
psycho.
have no choice but to pull in, and you'd be inside this thing, and you would just be praying to God you'd come out, and you could have totally made it, but it would have been the scariest single ride you'd ever have because it was backdoor, but at like 70 feet tall.
No, it was insane.
But the guy that got sucked over the falls, I later found out that he had, in fact, held on to the board through the entire experience. He had got sucked over and bear hugged his tow board and got pounded and did not surface until the rock. So that's like 200 yards underwater. He was probably underwater for 50 seconds to a minute, you know, because you're getting dragged in one wave that long. And he popped up at the rocks. And then someone came in to save him. I think it was Yuri Soledad came in to save him. And I was just thinking, like, how do you even hold on to something? I could barely hold on to a GoPro underwater there. You know, like, gosh, that's phenomenal. I think he deserves an award because he went over the falls on maybe the single gnarliest wave I had personally ever been in the water out there and seen. Like, and he's like survived while holding a board. I don't know. I think it's just like another level.
Maybe it's like a comfort thing. You're like, I can hold on to something. Like, this is the scariest situation a human can possibly find themselves in.
I don't even think he inflated then. He must have not
I think
have
he just bear hugged it.
Well, the board always comes up before you. That's all foam.
It's true.
But
maybe it's
still,
not a bad
nonetheless, like, oh my gosh, it's just like, Ridge, play the clip.
Yeah, no, the clip's been playing, I'm sure. But I remember, that was by far, maybe not by far, but height wise, that was the tallest Jaws day I've ever seen. I got the biggest wave of my life that day. You towed me, and we had to battle pretty hard for it.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it was just, and then for you, that first half of that day was an absolute shocker. Like, when I was towing you, I could not get you on a good one, and it was pretty frustrating. And then we switched, and then we had the situation where the ski went on the rocks, and then that afternoon, I feel like when I towed you again, after all that crap happened, we were contemplating going home. I think that was one of, like, just, I wasn't even surfing, I was just towing you, but that was definitely one of the most memorable sessions ever, because everyone had gotten smoked and was gone, and it was just like basically three teams of some of the best guys. And I'll never forget, like, looking down at the waves you were dropping in on. It was just insane that afternoon.
Yeah, that morning I just felt super disrespected, you know. people were just like going right around us like we were kooks or something, and we're waiting our turn, we're doing our normal thing, and eventually I had to yell at someone, and that never feels good. It throws you off, and I was ready to like literally drown somebody because I was like, dude, this is the day I've been waiting, and I've already proven myself more than almost everyone out there. There's a handful of guys that are for sure like the proven guys, of course, like the Ian Walshes or the Nathan Florences and that type of crew. But there was other guys that just showed up and they were just like, wait our turn, and they would like, I think because they took us as too nice of guys, they were, just like, oh, we can just go around him. Like, he won't do anything.
That was crazy.
And
that's
at
never
this point now,
again.
I'm like, I'm at an age now where if that happens to me again, like, I'm going to be really pissed off and they're going to know it. Because I've already paddled it on Giant Days. I've been out there for close to 20 years, and I've put my time in on every swell, and there's only a handful of guys that'll do just about anything gnarlier, And so it's like, I don't ask to like have these extra privileges. I just want to take my turn. So leave me alone, Like, I'm just out there to enjoy and have the wave. And so a lot's changed since then. Hopefully that doesn't ever happen again. But I just remember not getting anything. At least I got you on that monster wave, which never got nominated, but it should have. And it just goes to show sort of, the politics of the sport because you were new to big waves.
I was a pretty unknown at that point, but yeah, I've measured it like the best I can. And it was a solid wave for sure. Like, is by far the biggest wave of my life. And I was psyched to just be able to ride it.
I think that wave was like 70 feet probably.
Yeah, I think I measured it 71 feet, I think, based on crude measurements. But yeah, it was surprisingly.
Don't worry,
really,
the way they've always measured a wave, the way they've always measured a wave for the XXL awards has been like, if he's this big in this stance, if he's 5'10" in a normal stance, let's say he's 5 foot. Let's just add that up. It's literally no different than what we were doing.
That's what I did, yeah.
Yeah, that's literally the same as anyone doing. So honestly, if you're measuring by those standards, then yeah, it was probably 74 feet or something.
Yeah, it definitely was there was waves nominated from Jaws that day that were like, I could visually look at it, and my wave was like a third bigger than that, but it's whatever. I don't care.
Who cares? Anyway, I mean, the thing is like, it's funny. That was the very tail end of all of that stuff, and big waves are so dead now. It just sucks. Like, Jaws contest is not happening. It hasn't ran in 5 years. It's been canceled for this year. The county of Maui didn't give the permits to, or, whatever the politics there. There's a lot of drama around Pe'ahi. And so they're not allowed to do a contest there, which is quite a shame because, it gives a lot of local kids that would get the wild card an opportunity. It gives us who grew up there the opportunity to compete for something, and there's only one big wave event, like legit, I would say prize purse, like mainstream sort of big wave events at NAS right now. But that, that all being said, I think that afternoon it was like I had been tested. I literally, I think what happened is I had like lost the board on the rocks, gone on the rocks. And then when I looked out, my jet ski's flying in the whitewater and it comes on shore, and I was like, oh my gosh, how could this day get any worse? I've already been just, ran through by just all these jabronis, and now I lost my jet ski on the rocks and I look like a total kook, and it's not even my fault because I didn't have anything to do with losing it. I was already on the cliff. And so then I had to try to save it, and the steering column was broken. I think you could find the footage, Ridge. But
yeah, I'll pull it up.
It's like I was trying to steer it and it could only turn right, and I just ended up having to bail, and the thing got absolutely just destroyed. Actually, I think we might have fixed that one up afterwards.
I think it's someone has it nowadays, but we fully got to refurbish it.
That day was a really interesting day because it was it January 21st, 2001 or 2021?
I think it was January 16th.
January 16th. That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. And I could remember when we lost, when the ski was in the river, there was people that were doing, like you could hear them because there was thousands of people on the cliff, and there was people laughing at me too. Like they were stoked to see it happen. I
can't believe that. That's crazy.
And, I was just like, are you serious right now? Like I almost just got destroyed on the rocks with this jet ski. Like, are you guys out of your minds? And, they ended up getting swept off the cliff later on because a giant swell. While I was dealing with my ski on the rocks, came in and knocked a bunch of them off. I remember that day I heard even gnarlier stuff, like people on the cliff broke legs and like had to be like ambulance helicoptered out of there. We couldn't get a helicopter to pick up my ski. I normally like to do it the day of, but it was just too many people. It was too chaotic. So actually the cool people that were there came down in the river with me and helped lift the machine into a coconut tree, and we tied it to a coconut tree because we're like, if it gets bigger tonight, this thing's gone. And I didn't want to lose it, of course. And I was like, this thing's probably going to get ripped apart by, scavengers later tonight or whatever. But actually, before all that happened, Ola, one of our water safety guys, he was trying to help me get the ski proper and straight to go back out to try to launch it back in through the shore break. And that was like, obviously the steering column broke, but we were going to try again. And a huge wave came and he didn't get out of the way enough, and he got ran over the rocks and like almost broke his ankle. His ankle was all swollen because the thing like landed on him, and I was yelling at him to get out of the way, but he's such like, he's so in it for the cause. He was doing anything to help this machine. I was like, dude, don't worry about it, move. And he just almost broke his leg. So it was just like complete catastrophe. I remember looking up, hearing people laugh, feeling so embarrassed, just so down, because like, to me, that was like my whole life up to that point. It's just everything was about Pe'ahi. It was about Jaws. It was about following in the footsteps of these incredible big wave riders. And I asked God, I'm like, I basically is like, am I being tested right now? Is this a test? And this strong emotion like came over me, this gut feeling. And, it basically was, yeah, this is a test, and how you go about it. Like, cause part of me wanted to just go up the cliff and get a ride home, but I knew I would be depressed and lonely and like in a dark place. And I was like, no, I gotta go back out. So we tied the jet ski to the coconut tree, swam back out, got picked up. And then Ridge was up to that point. You're right, Ridge. You were terrified of towing out there, and something came over you and you're like, I'll tow you in. I'll get you the best waves. And we ended up going, and sure enough, got, the best waves that, I'd ever gotten up to that point. One giant barrel. I wasn't in for a long time, but it was like so big that the fangs of the lip, it was breathing in so hard. I was going reverse and I could see these flares coming into the barrel, and it was golden light, and it was so big. The barrel to that point was the biggest barrel I'd probably been into. And I wasn't sure I was going to make it. And I came flying out and everyone was screaming, losing it. And it was like my best barrel of the day. And then we went back out and another one came. It just felt like guys weren't even towing for them. They were just coming to us, like straight to us. We were sitting a little bit wide of everyone, just keeping our distance. And that was the one I like pulled in, and then I like had to kind of punch through doggy door and do a big kick out the back.
Yeah.
And I was surfing with another level of purpose, similar to how maybe Laird did once Brett got hurt. I just didn't care if I fell or not. It was just, I had to do it. And to get to those waves, to get to that moment, I had to go through all that drama. It reminded me of this Latin word I learned when I was actually with the Navy SEALs in Patagonia. It was the name of the trip. It was called Acheron. And an Acheron means in order to get to heaven, you have to pass through hell. So I had to pass through hell in order to get to my euphoria, to my Shangri-La, which was the best giant barrels, and everyone had left. And that day was resurrected, and it was still one of the worst day ever at Jaws and the best day I've ever had at Jaws.
Yeah, I remember, after the jet ski went on the rocks and we finally regrouped, because that whole scenario took like 2 hours almost. And I was just sitting
really
around. I was just watching these.
Remembering it.
Dude, I was sitting out there because I couldn't help because I was on a ski and I was just watching these perfect waves, like 80 or 70 foot waves just rifling off. And then we were talking about like the rate chatter on the radio. It was like, oh, should we pack it up? Everyone like Ola was banged up. You were, not too stoked on the whole situation. And I'm just like, dude, it cannot end this way. Like, this day is perfect.
Can't end this way.
Get some crazy ones. And yeah, that big one that you said, that huge barrel, I remember, towing you in. I thought I was pretty far, like to the west,
channel.
Like, close to the channel. And this thing, the wall stretched all the way to K Bay. It was just one wall. And when that happens,
that's like, for people that don't know, that's a mile away. That's like the next bay that's over.
Like, this thing was drawing so much water, and I knew I was pretty close to the channel, but it still felt like I was towing in so deep. That was like the fastest I've ever towed you in, and I launched and got like freaking 15 feet of air launching over the top of it. And I'm just like, well, like, I hope he held on long enough to get down the line on this thing. And I think you'd like go super deep. And then I was just on those huge days, like when I'm following the wave, it's just mist. Like I can't see anything. And I'm like, I hope it's going well for him. Like, I hope I put him in the right spot. And then out of the mist, I just hear the crowd. And then I just see you flying into the channel. I'm like, thank God you didn't fall on that. But there was only one other day that I've ever seen waves doing that, where they were stretching across the channel and loading up and going below sea level. And that was the eddy swell that you were in the contest, and I was
the
out
one
there.
you got pounded on.
Dude, yeah.
You got that huge wave and just got destroyed. Oh my gosh.
I don't know what.
Gnarly.
I remember that morning, I was in my house, and my roommate Logan and I were watching. It was a midday peak here. It wasn't picking up till midday, but it was already huge for the contest. And we were watching the contest live and already made plans with Ola, like, okay, we're going to go out and I want to tow. It's probably going to be empty because all the best big wave surfers are on Oahu. And I was just watching the bay closing out, and I'm just like, Logan, like, I might die today, dude. Like, this is really
might be the
gnarly.
last time you see me.
Like, dude, and then I was looking at the buoys, and it's like 23 feet at 19 seconds or whatever it was. And I was like, okay, we're committed.
That Eddy day, without a doubt, was probably one of the craziest numbers I'd ever seen. It was 23 feet at like 21 seconds. And it's like, unheard of. That normally its biggest days ever are like 20 feet at 20 seconds. And for people that are listening or watching that don't know what that means, 20-foot swell with a 20-second interval. And it's not so much the height of the swell that'll determine how big the wave breaks. It's the interval as well, because it's like a rolling mountain out in the middle of the ocean. And so the bigger the interval between, that means the more mass and energy that these waves sort of have. And and water isn't moving. It's just this energy, this invisible force under the surface that's like making the water lift up like your cat crawling under your carpet. It's like this energy, right? And so that level is just, unheard of. I think there was even like some 27 foot at 23 second interval rating. Like, it was just mad. Yeah.
So by the time we got out there, it was like 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock or something. And it was already big. It was already like 60-foot faces and really gnarly, but it was getting bigger so fast. And it was different from the January 16th, the Super Swell Saturday swell, in that day I think is a little bit more north, and it was a smaller swell, but it somehow peaked up the waves taller. And I don't know about you, but for me, like, that day was a little bit easier to ride maybe by the time it was afternoon that day, because it was like, okay, it was a straight shot to the channel. But this day was angled so much more west, and when it's more west, the wave, it shifts from being like a big peak to more of a slab. So it wasn't
just a walled out slab.
It wasn't any means the tallest, but it was like these waves had no back. And you look at some of the footage, and I think Yuri Soledad got a wave that day that he fell on, that you could almost see the reef bubbling up on the West Bowl, which is like,
well, that's terrifying. The thing is, sometimes the biggest waves aren't the tallest. It's like, we almost got to measure waves based on their mass and not so much the height, because like the height is one thing, but there's like, the joules or the energy level. And now, with forecasting, we look at that, and that could mean like that day, what was it, at something like 20,000 joules, or was it more?
Yeah, I can't remember, but
I remember, I want to say it was like at 20,000 or 24,000, and a normal Jaws day is like 10,000.
Yeah.
It might have been more, Ridge. It might have been like 40,000. I don't know. I got to look back on it, but I remember
I think we could look in the archives and find it. I'll try to find it.
Look in the archives, because I'm curious how it was like so much bigger, so much more energy than anything that we'd ever even seen or surfed. And I was at the Eddy, and it's so great to do the Eddy and stuff, but it's those days out at Pe'ahi when no one's around that I wish I could do both. If it's just it's a tough one, but of course you're always going to do the Eddy because it's the most prestigious, legendary event there ever was in surfing, but it means you might miss out on those Pe'ahi days. Those. So I'll leave it to you to like pick up the slack.
Yeah. So on that day,
wait, you got hurt though, right?
Yeah. No, I got super messed up.
And you weren't there the rest of the day. You were out after that.
Yeah. So I mean, I was probably out surfing for 2.5 hours, and I only caught 3 waves because I don't know what came over me that day, but it was just like, I saw the swell and it was like, this is an opportunity of the lifetime. Like I remembered how it was January 16th, the couple years before, where it was like so hard to get a set. And this day was like, the sets would come in and everyone's looking at each other like I don't want it, you know? So like, it was like, this is the best opportunity of my life. Like it's west, like I can get the wave of my life like 10 times over right now. So I just went into that crazy mode. And I think I maybe went a little bit too far because I just told Ola, I was like, dude, wait for the ones that wall all the way across the channel. And I'm going to let deep and I'm going to let go deep and I'm going to try to get barreled in every single wave.
For sure, right?
And the first, but that my inexperience came back to bite me in this case. And I guess it wasn't my fault.
Well, I feel like on those days you got to work into it. Like, you know what you're capable of, but you need to like start way below of where you think you need to go. Because if you try to just go straight to the top to where you left off, that wave will snap at you. Because that place is like 100%. A spiritual place, and it'll either give you the worst ride of your life or the best ride of your life, and then the next wave give you the worst experience of your life. And on those days, my experience has been don't even try to push it at first, and then as you go through the session, by your 10th wave, all of a sudden things just start to click in. And you might get lucky on the way where one just sort of happens, but you can't force it. Like if you, as soon as you try to force it, it's just you're gonna get so much trouble.
Yeah, and on paper, the smaller swells that are similar direction to this one, I was really comfortable with how that wave breaks, and I know what the barrels look like. But the difference was on this day, it was so much bigger and it was drawing so much water off the reef that on the West Bowl, you know, usually where you pull up under it and it slabs, it was breaking outside of that and like crumbling or like kind of not crumbling, but like clamping. And then it would like regurgitate on the inside of the West Bowl and finally start barreling. And my first wave, I like pulled in and the thing started clamping and I just barely squeaked out. Like it hit my shoulder and
you were probably, as Derek Dorner put it, so there's like where we paddle in is the first bell. Like that's like the first ding, you know, that's like that's where we get those nice barrels. That's where you see all the good paddle barrels basically. And on the second bell is kind of where you're talking about, where unless you get barreled from way deep, the very end kind of will clamp because it's not on that inside ledge. It's kind of on that second ledge, the second bell. And when it all comes together is on the third bell, the final one, which is that Jerry Lopez era, or, you know, maybe there probably were waves that day. I
think later that day there was.
I heard that afternoon everyone had left, and it was only, I think, Sean and DK Walsh just sitting out there. They had gotten their waves, and they said it was the biggest barrels that they'd ever seen, and it was breaking unlike they'd ever seen. They didn't know you could go fast enough to make these waves. So I think that was the third bell, but that third bell is where it connects everything. And so the second bell I've found is really hard to surf. Like that January 16th day, it's like that was just like tapping into third bell, where it was like almost the third reef, the third ledge, and the second. And so that one of those really good waves, it ended up sort of clamping that I snuck out of, and the other one was a little bit deeper of a barrel, like it wasn't wide. But to get those proper ones, the one that Adam from Poland windsurfing fell on, that was a third bell probably. That was like the only wave that did that. So yeah, you probably found yourself on this weird, like in between the second ledge that had, if it was, cause it was so west, you had to be on the channel side. You had to be on the West Bowl, but had it been a little more north than that side, you would have been twice as deep and probably in the barrel and made it out no problem.
Yeah. So I had that super close call, and we waited a super long time for another big set. The second wave, I was kind of freaked out from the wave before, and this wave, and maybe it was a little bit smaller or something, but it opened up and I kind of got under it, but like didn't fully get the barrel I wanted. And I remember waiting for the third wave. I was like, okay, it's going to come together on this one. This is going to be the wave of my life. This is the time to do it. Nobody's out here. This could like make my career, you know? And I wasn't doing it because of the career aspect, but it's just a factor. It was more so that this is a crazy opportunity to just get the wave of your life. And that third wave, I let go really, really deep, and I was just setting up for it. I'm like, this is it. This thing, everything looks like it's going to be perfect. And I pulled under this thing and it just threw over me the biggest barrel I've ever been in. Like it feels like you're in a, you know how it is, like
Coliseum.
Feels like you're in a cathedral.
Oh yeah, that's the word.
I'm in it, and then all of a sudden you just see that like mid-face kink starting to pop up. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
the one that you see and you know.
That's the paddle kink. Nathan Florence broke his back 2 winters ago because it was starting to tap into that second ledge a little bit. Or that's honestly when the interval is too big to paddle because you have to go over a step. And it's like they called it the phantom chop because you don't see it until you're flying off of it. And if a wave has too much interval, like the perfect paddle numbers, I think for Pe'ahi, if you want it big, is 16 feet at 16 seconds. That's like get a Shane Dorian type of wave opportunity. Once the interval goes over 20, there's so many waves you can't ride because you paddle in and you're so late that by the time you stand up, there's that ledge coming up and it's a kink in the wave and it's a ramp. And my worst wipeouts of all time, the day Aaron Gold or the day he actually broke the world record, and it was a monumental day. It was probably the best paddling day of all time out there. I had gotten like a 54-second hold down, dragged all the way to the rocks because I was attached to a 10-foot floor and scorpioned on the bottom. And I remember that so vividly. And I remember that ledge. And that was the day I chose never to use wax on a big wave gun out there because if you surf for 4 hours or longer, your wax gets kind of bad. And you could keep wax in, but it's hard to apply. And I went full deck pad because of my experience on SUP and my experience of just always riding on it with my windsurfers and stand-up paddles. And at that point, it was like, so that ledge is notorious for taking people down. Nathan broke his back because he's been trying to treat Pe'ahi like it's backdoor. And while there are waves, you could probably do that. He hasn't been on the right ones and straight up just takes off, airdrops, lands on his back, and just gets snapped in two. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so this thing was I was already driving through the barrel when this kink was popping up. So that gives you an idea of how far off the actual inside West Bowl ledge it was. And next thing I know, the thing's just clamping. There's the exit is disappeared and you're just like in like this thing. And then I just was airborne. And then I was like, shit, like this is not going to end up well. And end up just getting sucked over and it was still doubling up. So I'm going over while all this mass is doubling up. And luckily I was able to pull my vest before I impact, but the impact was so gnarly that it gave me a concussion. Like I never hit anything, but all that force and going with it.
The tension underwater.
Like
the atmospheric change.
Yeah, like I don't remember. Like I never went unconscious or anything. But I don't like it was so foggy trying to remember exactly what that wipeout was like. But I remember it just took forever. No idea how long it was. That's because you were on
the West Bowl too, though. So like if you fall on the North Peak, while it's scary because you're farther away from safety in the boats, it gets aerated much quicker because that's where it's like the peak. But when you're surfing the West Bowl, you get way more pounded because it's a lot of blue water coming out of a 100-foot channel. And all of that is dumping on top of your head. And it's not aerated as much. And, you know, during, I think it was the 2018 Jaws Pe'ahi Challenge, in the final, my first wave I airdropped and fell on my stomach. And it might have been a 15-foot Hawaiian wave, so like a 30-foot face or bigger. And same thing. It's that deep blue water that surrounds you. And you change atmospheres so quick, it put pressures against your head. It's not like scuba diving or free diving where you clear and you kind of go. The atmospheric change is so fast from aerated water, which is like normal atmosphere, to like 10 atmospheres deep in a half a second. And you get a concussion and you just start getting all dizzy and like tweaked out.
Yeah. So, I mean, luckily what saved me, and I don't know what would happen if I didn't pull so early, but I'm of the philosophy, and other big wave surfers will argue with me on this one, but I'm of the philosophy, the second you touch the water, pull that thing, and
because it takes a few seconds to inflate.
Yeah, and luckily by the time I got sucked over, so I think if I hadn't have pulled so early, I would have been sent straight down and probably would have had a 2-wave hold down. But luckily, because I pulled it, blasted me super far and I had a really long hold down. But luckily, when I popped up, I had enough time because before the next wave, because I'd been dragged so far, and I just see Ola coming in, and I'm like, I popped up facing in, and I like couldn't see anything, like everything's spinning, and I just turn around and I just see like the shape of Ola coming in. I'm like, my savior. I didn't even realize what was behind him, which was another huge whitewater. And I put out my hand and I just go to the side of the ski, and like, I'm so inflated with one of those big canisters.
You can't even
like,
get on?
I couldn't get on, and I just didn't have the energy because I got so blasted. And I'm just like, in my head, I'm just like, the time's going by. Like, there's a lot of time going by, and I'm pretty sure there's another one coming. And I just look over my shoulder, and it's just 40-foot whitewater about to take us out. And I just start screaming at Ola. I'm just like, go! Because he was like, you guys
almost lost the ski?
Yeah, no, he's the type where he's like no man left behind. Like, he'll wait forever. And
sometimes they were like, Ola, we love the dedication, but like, just go.
Yeah, so I was just yelling and just used up all my air. Like, every ounce of air I had was like trying to tell him to get out of there, because there wasn't a lot of backups
Did
that
you guys
day.
make it?
So, yeah, so I mean, I didn't. I got freaking exploded. I let go and I got exploded off the jet ski with a negative breath. So like, I used up all my breath. And I'm just doing flips underwater. And I wasn't even scared, because all I could think about was, oh my God, Kai's going to kill me. Like, I took out one of his nice skis.
And up to that point, I was like, I think I had lost 3 up to that point, or been a part
season,
of it.
Yeah, that season, I think we already lost one.
No, I don't think we did. But it was like
maybe
previous
it was the season before.
It was just, no matter what, you don't want to lose one. And when we were driving Yamahas, those things were so susceptible to being lost, because they just did terrible in the whitewaters. And then as soon as we decided to switch to Sea-Doo, I feel like, knock on wood, but it just doesn't seem like it's the same issue anymore. Like the freaking, oh my gosh, like those Yamahas would just spin out in the whitewater. No matter how much we tune these things out, they just had not enough like torque. So when you'd come in to save people, you had to be so careful. And there was times you could probably get someone, but you might lose the ski. And it's just
so that's all I could think about.
So much drama behind that.
I was in like the worst situation of my life, probably like I had concussion and I'm still getting smoked, and all I could think about was the freaking jet ski, and we were losing it. And
there's nothing worse than dying and then just not being able to. You're just thinking about a material object.
But it was a good thing though, because it took my thoughts off of how long I was underwater for, because I was under
a little distraction.
I was fully, the craziest thing, I was fully inflated, like that biggest you can inflate that thing. And I got sent, like, I was getting pounded for a while, and I thought I was reaching the surface, and I was kind of like swimming. I'm like, okay, it's going to be over soon. And then all of a sudden, another like bit of energy just pushed me, and I just slammed the bottom with my feet and cut my foot open, fully inflated after already being under the water for like 15 seconds already. And then I'm just like, this cannot be happening. Like, this is almost funny at this point that it's gone on for so long. And then finally just bobbed my way to the surface, and it was like the best feeling ever, seeing Ola coming around again. And I'm like, I cannot believe he made it. And that was my last wave of the day. I went straight to the hyperbaric chamber after that. It was not good, but I wish I could have been around longer that day, because just to see it, because what the stories Sean and DK come back with. And the thing about that day, the people that did go out, almost every single person got a concussion or got hurt or blew out their knee.
I don't think anyone made waves. Like,
no, it was really hard to surf.
Yeah, those are the days there's a performance aspect to big wave surfing when the conditions are right, and then there's a survival aspect. And when you show up, you just pick it. And sometimes, I'm guilty of this. I just want to do backflips and airs and turns and try to get barreled. But sometimes there's days where the conditions aren't conducive, and you might blame yourself for not being surfing at the level you want to, but you're only as good as the wave allows you to be. And sometimes these waves, like, all you can do is kind of just survive them. You go straight and you navigate them, and, you just kick out, and you try to do something in between. But yeah, like that day, from what I heard, is like there was like 2 successful rides, and then everyone sort of just gave up on it because it was just so west and so big. And I just wonder if that had a little bit more north in the swell direction, and it was like more northwest, like a true 325 degree. It probably would have been 20 feet taller and the best Jaws you've ever seen.
Yeah,
because even if angle.
Even if you were trying to you couldn't shoulder soldier it at all. Like, the wave would just pull you into the death zone and then just destroy you. And yeah, it's crazy. Everyone got hurt by the end of the day. and there was just the biggest Jaws waves anyone had seen in years. It was pretty psycho. I wish you were around and I could have seen you surf that afternoon, because it
maybe
probably been one of the
this
craziest
year.
waves. Yeah,
Maybe
hopefully.
this year. Yeah. Well, there's still so much to discuss. I think, come the next episode, we should definitely talk about my single favorite day ever out at Pe'ahi was the day they canceled the Pe'ahi challenge.
Yeah.
It was, that was like probably the best session I'd ever had out there. And, basically because I had waves that were in the 70-foot range by myself, like no one else. And I don't know if I'll ever get a day like that again. Pray to God I will. But we'll, just have to see what we're given, and take it and enjoy it.
Yeah, and we're at the dawn of a new season right now, so it'll be sick to do the podcast directly after big swells and relive the moments right after they happen.
Do the full
It'd be sick.
recaps on it.
Yeah. And
But yeah, like
thinking,
you said before, Ridge, we could go how many episodes? I think if people want to keep hearing Jaws related stuff, we can keep going, or we could definitely switch it up to the Mavericks lore, or for all that purpose, if you want to go really crazy, we could just talk about foiling or windsurfing or kiting or something just completely different.
Yeah, I think what would be fun, maybe we can, you guys could let us know in the comments, but maybe for next week, it'd be fun to do a live one, and we could answer questions. So yeah, let us know if you guys want to do that.
If you made it this far in the podcast, you could possibly know that we're going to do a live next week, and maybe you can be a part of it.
Yeah, it sounds good. Well, hopefully we see you
there. Even if we
then.
have like 2 people on, we'll be stoked.
Yeah, let's do it.